tradition within the Jewish community to study together and to study with artists and see how basically the Torah and all of our writings inform art and really add another depth and dimension to the art that Jewish artists create. And so this is our second year together, and hopefully next year we will start to be in person again, but we're glad you could all join us. Cantor, I was gonna say that it was a perfect song as a bridge to Isaac, who I'm thrilled to is agreed to be a speaker today. And Isaac and I have known each other for quite some time, and we are both involved in the Jewish Artists Initiative. So I really, I hope that most of you have read about Isaac. I would just point out a few things about him, which is one of the things I think is wonderful about Isaac's work is he goes beyond just a very long tradition of paper cutting, which if you look through history, and especially in Jewish art, you find paper cutters throughout time. It's really a time-honored form of art, and he has brought it into modern day by incorporating the superheroes that we find in comic books, but in very subtle ways, and that's why I wanted Isaac to speak, because to understand his art is to really hear from him and to get into the depth of what he does. And so I wanna, and that's part of why I wanted to bring Isaac here, but also along with his wife, and some of you may know his wife, Shauna, they started Paper Midrash, which brings together communities to study together and look at art. And it is really, Ilana, my hope is that out of this will come eventually our own artist in resident Shabbaton, when we can really all gather and really study in depth with Isaac and Shauna about all that these texts which we just so skim the surface of today, to really delve into them and to see where they go. So it is, without further ado, I want to introduce Isaac, and thank you, Isaac, for sharing your creativity and really this notion of how Jewish texts inform what you do, and that therefore you're living out what we just studied.
Thank you so much, Georgia, and Cantor Ilan. Thank you both for bringing me into your community. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you at Temple Bethel, though I'm only here virtually. It really is something that I've been looking forward to. Georgia and Cantor and I were talking about what text are we going to look at? What is the theme? What can we do to really tie this into my practice as an artist? And I want to jump right into this idea of peoplehood, but I can't, because I promised that I would talk a little bit about what it is that I do first, so that you have a little bit of context for my work and for for these concepts as they show up in it. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through just a few things. But even though what this is going to do is bring up a little screen on your computer or your iPad or whatever, and we're all going to get pushed to the side, you are the primary reason that we're here today. So please, if you have questions or comments and you want to just unmute and ask them or put them in the chat, please do that. I want this to be a conversation. I don't want this to be a lecture. You can look at pictures online or read stuff, but this is for us to interact. So don't let this scare you off as I share my screen. So nonetheless, so yes, of course, there's my name nice and big. We start with that, right? First of all, what I do as an artist is I'm a paper cutter, as Georgia said, but I use cut up comic books in my work as a way to explore the ideas of traditional Jewish texts. So what you're seeing here, this is a piece that is called Live Long and Prosper. It is a representation of the Kohenic blessing, which actually seems perfectly apropos since we've been talking about being a nation of priests. And this is the priestly blessing that you may or may not have seen at high holiday services or in other art. There's this particular gesture that the rabbis, the chazan, that the clergy make to bless the congregation. It has been adapted in the 20th century and now into the 21st into Star Trek. where the Vulcan salute is similar, and that's because the actor who played Spock in the original Star Trek series, Leonard Nimoy, was Jewish. He was asked to have some sort of a gesture for the Vulcan people to make, and he remembered in his head this thing that he saw when he was a young kid going to temple, and that is why the Vulcans in Star Trek use a nice Jewish hand symbol. And the way that I made my representation of it is with cut up Star Trek comics. If you look closely, you can actually see little bits of Leonard Nimoy and little bits of text saying live long and prosper, but also words from our tradition and little bits and pieces here that help me explore the idea of what does it mean to be a nation of priests and to be able to bless each other in this way. Now, I'm often asked, why comics? Why would I use this as a way to explore text? Georgia mentioned, of course, that paper cutting is a traditional Jewish art form. It's so easy because it is very lightweight. You don't need a lot of tools, which if you're a people who is often fleeing from pogroms and Nazis, you want something that you can just carry around with you from country to country as you flee. And I know that's a little glib, but the truth is, it is a great art form for a people on the move, for us wandering Jews. All you need is something sharp and something flat. As for comics, the language of comics speaks to me in a very similar way that our Torah does. These big, bold, bombastic statements. Good and evil are very much black and white. The ideas of ethics and morality and behavior are in these stories. They are supposed to encourage us to think about what sort of life do we live? Are we a hero? Are we a villain? Are we a bystander? How do we behave? And I feel like those stories can really help us thinking about our stories in the Torah. As well, you think about the fact that so many of these comics were written and created by Jews. I'm gonna move my chat window over there so I can see it. So many comics were created by Jews in the early 20th century in America, because if you were a Jewish creative, a writer, or an artist, there weren't many fields you could get into because of the whole blacklist, keeping Jews out of the industries. So comic books were a lowbrow thing that Jews were able to work in and create. And it's why Superman was created by Jews, Batman and Robin were created by Jews, virtually the entire Marvel universe from the Avengers, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, were all created by Jewish people trying to tell stories. Now, I'm getting a question here on the side about when does paper cutting start and where? Jews have been cutting paper for, we have documented hundreds of years. Paper, of course, is not the most long-standing of materials. If you make something out of granite, chances are you're going to find it thousands of years later. We only have a few examples of paper and that really last. When we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and such, these are things that are on parchment, on animal skin. They tend to hold up if you stick them in a pot and leave them by the Dead Sea. Paper is a little more fragile. So we do have documented paper use by Jews. We see ketubot back to the 1400s in Italy. That's really where we see paper cutting, examples of paper cutting that are maintained here. But Jews have always used it as a way to create usable art. We have this idea in Judaism about Hidur Mitzvah, about the beautification of the commandments. And that is why so many of our holidays include beautiful objects or ways to celebrate, whether it is your Chanukiah should be beautiful, or you decorate your sukkah with fruit hanging from it, or you would have a mizrach in your home, a plaque on the wall telling you which direction to face when you pray, our ketubot, all of the ways that we celebrate as Jews. We're supposed to beautify those commandments, and paper cutting has been a way traditionally that Jews have come to that. Now, this is 10 pieces from my series called Paper Tefillah. It's a series of work that explores the modern American Jewish Reform prayer service. It's relatively specific, as broad as it is, looking at each of the prayers in our service and using comics as a way, as I said, to explore it. And for those of you who have studied Midrash, right, the Midrashic process is one in which we look at a verse from the Torah, and in order to better understand it, we look at texts elsewhere. We read something from the book of Joshua, we read something from Psalms, and we say, oh, here's this word here, and it shows up in the Torah, and that helps us understand what the Torah means. Well, I do the same thing. My secondary text is comic books, as I said. So in each of these pieces, I'm using a particular comic a particular hero, a particular story to explore, in this case, the prayers. So side by side here, you can see my Yotzer and my Ma'ariv Arvim. The Yotzer is on the left, and it's this colorful, angular piece, bright and shiny, with all of these colors. On the right is my Ma'ariv Arvim, which is more the colors of nighttime and darkness. And I've used heroes that represent the ideas of light and darkness in these pieces as I explore what it means to pray these words, to come together as a community, whether in person or virtually. So for instance, in the Ma'ariv Arvim piece on the right, you can see this sort of hand of God rolling back the orbits of the planets, moving the sun and the moon, really making those seasons change in time around us, which is what Ma'ariv talks about. It talks about how we come to the end of the day and God is responsible for the seasons that we experience and the cycles of time. And I really wanted to explore this idea, the metaphorical hand of God rolling back the heavens. You can see in the center here, not only the words from that prayer in this sort of mystical eye in the Hamsa shape, but also in this comic, the words, "This is everything, this is me." And I loved the idea that the comics become this sort of stand-in for the voice of God, for the voice of the divine that I think we try to hear. Now I want to show you a little bit about how these pieces come to be. So this is, in 5 pictures, my process. I love this slide. I start with text. As I said, my work is very much based in Torah or Talmud or some sort of story from our people. And I take that and I will sketch something up in my little sketchbook. I've always got one handy because you never know when ideas are going to strike. Sketching goes to cutting, removing all these pieces from the paper. Then I go through my comics. In this case, I found this great piece that says, "You follow me now." And in this piece about Sinai, which you can see at the right, it's this exploration of God speaking to the people of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai, as we just saw in our text study together, God saying, "You follow me now." And in fact, the words that you can see in that speech bubble come from the yellow lanterns in DC Comics, whose rings are fueled by fear. And I was thinking about that feeling that the Jews would have at the foot of Mount Sinai, awe and trembling we read in the Torah, and that fear of what we are undertaking as part of this covenant. So the work is something that is really personal to me. I started cutting paper 25 years ago when I was living in Jerusalem with my wife, who was in her first year of rabbinic school. And since then, I have shown work all over the world, and my work is in collectors' hands, and do gallery shows. When there are galleries again, I will no doubt be doing that, although it's been a rough year, right? We haven't been able to go in person and see work up close. And that's really what I like to do, is to share my work with people in person. This Zoom session is going to be as close as we get. I want to show you a little bit about what I've been doing this past year here in lockdown. So I have often had a social justice component to my work, where the ideas that I feel are tied to our tradition in terms of tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. We have a religion that is filled with these little slogans and mottos about being better people, about looking out for each other, about struggling to find justice and shalom and emet, truth, right? All of these things. So this was a piece we heard a lot in 2020. We heard the phrase, "I can't breathe," a lot from our African American community. We heard it used metaphorically as well, to this idea of how it feels to exist in an unjust system. And so these words, which come from the Emma Lazarus poem at the foot of the Statue of Liberty, you perhaps know Emma Lazarus was a Jewish poet who wrote the Great Colossus, which are these words, "Give me your poor huddled masses yearning to breathe free." And so yearning to breathe free became this sort of catchphrase for me, thinking about what it means to be yearning to breathe free. The idea that freedom, that liberty, that justice is something you aspire to, that you have to seek out, and that you that we cry out for it in our souls. And it's not surprising to me that a Jewish poet's words would reflect this sense of yearning for justice that we see in our tradition. This is another piece that I made that was inspired by the Wall of Moms in Portland, Oregon, which is now 8-9 months back. There was this big movement in the streets. We were seeing all these moms wearing yellow, protesting, and this is made actually with superheroes who are moms. So characters like Jessica Jones, Jessica Drew, who's Spider-Woman, Greer Nelson, who's Tigra, Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, Jubilation Lee. So all of these mom heroes tucked within these women protesting for justice, for equality, and not a Jewish protest, but a protest that I think is very parallel to our Jewish ideals of seeking justice, of that responsibility of being in a place where we are looked to for morality, for decisions, for being mensches, right? This is what we're talking about. When we talk about the responsibility of being Jews, it's about being a light to the nations. It's another phrase we didn't talk about in our text study, but one that I always think about. What does it mean to be Jewish and to be looked to, whether for good or bad, as an arbiter of what it means to be just? Now, the last thing I want to do before we jump into peoplehood is just talk a little bit about my latest huge series. So since the lockdowns started a year ago, I've been making golems. Golems are this traditional Jewish idea of building a figure to protect you from something, empowered either by Jewish magic or spells, or in some cases, actually having the word emet written across its forehead. Again, you talked about this, Cantor Ilan, the power of truth and emet, and what it means when you have the first, middle, and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and how that empowers us. And my golems have been a response to all of these things that we've been going through together in America, in the world. First starting off with just these basic building blocks, taking Jewish comic book heroes like the Thing and building these forms of strength and power, and exploring ideas about, well, if not emet, if not truth that empowers the golem, what could it be? On the right, we see a golem made out of Captain Marvel comics. Captain Marvel starts off as young Billy Batson, who says this word Shazam and becomes a grown-up hero. It's very much a bar mitzvah moment. If you haven't seen the Shazam movie, you totally should. Thinking about how we use words and speech to find power within ourselves, to be our own heroes. And whether it's golems like on the left, empowered by the word breathe, again, this sort of response to what we were seeing on the streets, and the idea of justice and bringing down lightning, or on the right, where we were all suffering through those fires earlier. Again, 2020 was this long year. It seemed like it was 10 years in one. Fires and smoke. And here's the hero, the Martian Manhunter, whose weakness is fire, and finds himself no longer able to be a superhero. But how do you rise above that? And he says, "Don't count me out yet, friend." So he is rising out of this fire, somehow still unconsumed and able to be a hero. And golem after golem after golem, sometimes angry, sometimes hopeful. This was one that I was doing as we were developing the vaccine. And you can see on the left, someone saying, "Gasp, the virus." And this strong golem here is actually made out of doctor heroes, including Doctor Strange. The idea being that doctors will save us. They will be the strength that we need. And it's been this journey for me. I have about, I'm nearly at 6, I think, of these smaller golems, these 12 by 12 golems. And I have more than a few that are, I've got one that I pulled out to show you. This is the fun of being on Zoom. So I have these larger golems that are 24 by 36. And I've got maybe 7 of these right now. Just, you can see almost life size compared to my body. Really playing around with these ideas of protection and power. And it's been a crazy year. Georgia mentioned as well that my wife and I teach together. My wife's a rabbi. We've been doing make your own golem workshops with congregations all around the country, virtually over Zoom, giving people the tools that they need to make their own golem with us, to explore these ideas of power. It's been wonderful and great to be able to engage with people and give them the opportunity to work in my style. But so that's all prelude. What I really want to talk about with you, and I'm hoping that this will be a conversation, as I said, is the idea of peoplehood. So I'm sure someone out there can just unmute and yell out what we're seeing here, what this representation is. Anyone recognize these? Now I get the quiet crowd, right? These are classic Mosaic interpretations of the 12 tribes. So a little background. So the Jews, theoretically, there are these 12 sons of Jacob, and each of them has a particular quality. We get them in this blessing. They're given by Jacob, and the Jews are often talked about in these 12 tribes. The tribes move off into the desert. We see them still referenced after Egypt as they get to Sinai, and as they wander around the desert for 40 years, we have all of these tribes. In fact, there's this great story that as they would walk through the desert and they would camp for however long, Miriam's well, which was this well inspired by Miriam's greatness, would flow out so everyone would have water and people would get in their little boats. It was so much water, you would have to take a boat to go from tribe to tribe and visit each other. So this is the way that we traditionally think about our story. There's Abraham and Sarah, there's Isaac and Rebecca, there's Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, and then Jacob has these kids, right? 12 kids, we all know their names, all these sons, and they're the children of Israel, and so we are all these tribes. But I want to talk about the idea that this is not fact. The Bible isn't history, right, Elon? It is a nice little story, but we know if we want to look at ethnography and we want to look at actual historical documents and archaeology, we know that the Jews of this time settling in Canaan were not 12 brothers. They were different peoples that came together. These Northern Kingdom people and Southern Kingdom people, these were not all people who had been brothers and siblings and family. They weren't all people that were enslaved together. Being an Israelite, being a Canaanite, however you want to refer to it, was an active choice that people made to be a people. And so in 2016, which now is thankfully so long ago, we had a fairly contentious election. And upon the results of it, I was thinking more and more about what it meant to be American and to be a people. America being very much that same sort of place where people come from all over and they choose to live together. They choose to be a people and to be a nation. And so I did a series of 12 tribes using the traditional iconography. So the lion for Judah, the boat for Zebulun, the tree for Asher, using these same images, but building them out of different minority superheroes. Some lesser known characters that just don't always get their say, maybe aren't known as well as Superman and Iron Man, who everybody knows, Wonder Woman, right? Very popular figures. But these are sort of, lesser heard voices. And I wanted to represent the tribes in this way because I really wanted to explore the idea that when we say we are a people, as Jews, what that means is we are a people who choose to be a people, who choose to live together, who choose to have the same morality and the same holidays and the same behaviors, even as they differ. Do you eat rice at Passover or not, right? We're not all experiencing Judaism in exactly the same way. But we choose to be Jewish every day. We choose to be a people in the same way that we choose to be American. And we choose to take what is best from where we come from, our backgrounds and our languages and our practices, and roll them up into one and to make this people. Ellen, thank you so much for your nice comment down there in the chat. I love sharing this work. I want you to see it a little bit closer. But again, please do use that comment field or call out as we talk about these pieces. Awesome, someone else just joined. So here's Judah. Judah is traditionally represented as a lion, and I've got this lion here in my piece, but the comics that I've used to make Judah feature Storm, Aurora Monroe, who is an African immigrant superhero, the leader of the X-Men. and very much about using her power to help other people, as all superheroes do, but very much about remembering that there are marginalized people, that there are people who we can't always hear their cries for help. And Storm is really big on helping those people. And in fact, what I've tucked here into part of the lion, you can see on the right, this blow up of one of the comic bits is someone holding up a sign from a comic that says, "Let her speak." And I love the idea that this is about, hearing Storm's voice, hearing the voice of a woman who is this new leader of the X-Men when she comes in, and giving her the opportunity to teach us, so that we learn not just from the traditional leaders, like the original leader of the X-Men is Scott Summers, Cyclops, or maybe Professor X, but Storm, who is this young woman who comes over from Africa and has to learn to be a hero. She's a fascinating character. My Asher, which again is traditionally represented as a tree, is made out of a Green Lantern. So Green Lantern is a superhero. He has a ring from aliens. It gives him this power to create anything that he wills. Traditionally, this is Hal Jordan. There are, however, many people who have received the ring since then. In this case, it's Simon Baz, who is a Lebanese American Muslim. And in fact, he is the first, I believe he's the first Muslim person to have wielded the Green Lantern ring. And in fact, in American comics, it's very rare to see Muslim superheroes. We see a lot of non-denominational heroes. We've seen Jewish heroes because of the Jewish creators. But there are certain people we don't always hear their stories. And I think it's because of a perceived reticence on the part of the American audience to accept people as heroes. And Simon Baz runs into these same sorts of problems. He's here, he's been arrested for no good reason. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time because he has a tattoo in Arabic. And the cops assume he must be up to no good because who speaks Arabic and is a good guy? No one, according to these cops. And he's here defending himself saying, "I am American." And they're like, "Well, you weren't born here." As if that matters, as if where you were born determines your values or determines the sort of life that you lead. His tattoo, by the way, says justice. It's just written in Arabic. And so there is this fear of the other that is part of his story of being a hero, nonetheless, even to protect people who believe that he is a villain. And I really like the idea, remembering that, when we talk about Muslims, we talk about siblings in religion, monotheistic siblings. We talk about the children of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael, raised together, and our responsibility to remember that we all are God's people. We all have a connection to the divine, whether we are chosen or whether we choose to be chosen, or whatever name we call the divine. We have to choose to live together. Whether we're talking about, in LA or in America or Israel or the world, we choose to be Jewish, we choose to be humans, and that means that a certain behavior is expected. And I have each of these pieces references things that were going on at the time. You may recall that one candidate, again back in 2016, called the other candidate a nasty woman. And that came into this piece, which is my representation of Simeon, who is traditionally represented as castle walls or a gate. So I have this castle gate. It's made with a character named White Tiger. Her real name is Angela Del Toro. She's the Latina superhero. And she is being called nasty by someone, but she owns that as, like if you mean by nasty, I am nasty to villains. Yes, I am. That sometimes that is what's called for. And there's some great quotes in this piece from her about, not that it's no longer acceptable to use racial slurs. I mean, it's very on point for the time. But thinking about what can we learn from these other voices? What can we learn about being Jewish by listening to marginalized voices? To remember that not everyone grew up eating potatoes and brisket. That not everyone grew up having rice and hitting each other with scallions at the Seder table. That there are different ways of being Jewish and of owning up to that responsibility that we accept as Jews. That's part of that covenant. The last one of the tribes that I want to bring up here and share is you can see here the tents of Gad. Gad is often represented as tents, but here they're made up with the character Luke Cage, also known as Power Man. Now, at the time, he did not have a Netflix TV show, but has since had an incredible show. So Luke Cage is an African-American superhero with bulletproof skin, who was introduced by a Jewish comics team a few decades ago. It was then, as it is now, a political statement just to have a Black man with bulletproof skin. The idea of that suggests the whole story of why would it be so important for a Black man to have bulletproof skin. And I think we all know, we've seen what goes on, even to the present day, not just in America, but thinking about what it means to have second-class citizens, to have people who are not treated equally, to know that justice is perhaps within our vision, not yet within our grasp. Right? We need to still reach for it. We need to seek it. We need to find justice as we pursue this goal, this task, this chore, this burden that we have of being Jews. We are chosen because of that responsibility of being a light to the nations, of seeking justice. And I lied. I'm going to share one more of the tribes with you. It's not one of the 12. So we talked about the 12 brothers, the 12 sons. Anyone out there wondering why I have perhaps left out someone? Does anyone know who's missing when we talk about the 12 sons of Jacob? Oh, come on, there's got to be some good feminist out there who's been reading up. There's a character missing. Her name is Dinah, Jacob's daughter, Dinah.
I was going to say Dinah. But you said sons, but I knew there was a daughter.
So. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay. Dinah's story, if you know it at all, we know the rape of Dinah. And the story we have in the Torah is part of it, but as you know, we always have commentary with Torah. Torah is not enough. But in the story, Dinah is raped by these other peoples, and all of her brothers go out and revenge the rape by... There's a long story involving tricking them into getting circumcised and then attacking them when they're recovering. I mean, it's a crazy story. But what I find interesting is that the way the rabbis tell this story about Dinah is that she was this beautiful young woman, and Jacob, her dad, was concerned that she would attract untoward attention from men. And so when they would travel, he would keep Dinah in a box. And that way, he didn't have to worry that she would be seen by other men. She would be safe from, how men are. So we have to lock our women in boxes. Like, that's the story. And that while being transported in this box, her arm was still visible. And that is what riled up these men to rape her. And it gets me that when you put Dinah as the cause of this, that it is her beauty and her arm that are responsible for the rape, as opposed to the guys, right, who were raping her. So this piece was a reminder for me that when we talk about the 12 tribes, we're leaving out one of these stories that's actually in our text. It's in Torah, and it's in Midrash as well, but we have the story of Dinah, and we have to remember that it's there, and that her story, though we may put her in a box, is key to who we are as a people. And thinking about what it means to tell a woman's story without actually hearing her story, but hearing only the voices of the men around her. Now, for those who are faint of heart, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There is some swearing in the piece. It's a fairly angry one. In fact, I don't think this even has all of the worst of it. It's made up with female superheroes. Wonder Woman, you can see Wonder Woman's arm, in fact, in the lower left here. Catwoman is in here, Black Canary, and it is basically, the box is made of all of these villainous sentiments against women. A lot of my work has this feminist thrust to it, because I think there's some wonderful stories and wonderful things to learn, again, from often unnamed characters in the Torah, but sometimes they have names and just their stories are not explored. So this box is, society and villains, saying, oh, we know women are tricky and prone to infidelity, or there's a little bit in here where people were chanting, lock her up, at presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Just the idea of womanhood being a trigger for so many people. It's something that I think we can all agree we need to get past. We're not there yet. I don't know what it's going to take, but I really believe that with my work, what I'm trying to tackle here is hearing those voices, hearing those stories, and engaging in a conversation. Engaging in not just remembering and rereading stories and traditional interpretations, but thinking about what are we missing in the stories, where can we explore? When there's a character who doesn't have a name, well, what's going on there? What's her story? Why do we include her and what's going on? What's the background? That's the fun of Midrash. And for me as an artist working in a Midrashic way is exploring those stories and trying to figure out what they mean to me. And what it means when I say, oh, well, we choose to be a people from all over with different ideas and different backgrounds. Judaism has always been a mishmash of peoples and ideas. We say, what, 2 Jews, 3 questions? I'm not sure that's enough questions, but you get the idea. The ratio is unequal. And that's for me what my art tends to come back to, is what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean for a story to be Jewish? And what does it mean for us to engage with people who have been dead for decades and centuries and generations and still say, oh, this is relevant, this is interesting to me, I want to be a part of this conversation. And that's what I hope we're going to do here is, have a little bit of a conversation about the work. I mean, yes, Sonny, you say comic books just took on a new meaning. They're so Jewish. As I said, Superman was created by 2 Jewish boys from Cleveland. And then and I should say Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, I'll give you their names. And then we have Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, who you may know as those names, but are really Jacob Kurtzberg and Stanley Lieber, nice Jewish boys from New York, who created Iron Man and Giant Man and Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk and the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. All these characters are so Jewish because it's people trying to make sense of the stories they've been told and raised on and to fit them into their life experience. That's what we do with Torah, right? We read these stories that someone else wrote down and we say, how does this make sense to me today? And today, I'm all about peoplehood, which is why it's been such a pleasure to be here for text study with you, Cantor Ilan, to share with you some of my work. I have some other stuff here in the studio that we could look at as well, but I'd love to sort of pick this apart and see if anyone has any questions on what I've been showing here. And we're really gonna just keep asking, come on, what's going on in your heads?
Isaac, I'm just curious, do you have any close-ups of Zebulon?
I'll tell you what I can do here. Theoretically, I can zoom right in.
Only because Zebulon is actually the kind of adopted tribe, if you will, of Temple Bethel. So it'd be very cool to, because we're in the port of Los Angeles. Yeah, because we're in the port.
Yeah, so Zebulon is traditionally represented with the ship. And so that is what I have here. The character that I'm using is America Chavez. And I actually just this week bought her latest issue of her comic. So America Chavez is one of my favorite characters because she fits into that undocumented immigrants category. So we have plenty of superheroes who are undocumented immigrants, which is an issue for us here in California in particular, right? So think about Superman, who is just an immigrant from another planet, who tries to fit in here in America. Very Jewish story, by the way. If you think about it, Superman is the immigrant experience. But America Chavez is a very similar thing. She comes from another dimension, the utopian parallel, but she finds herself in our dimension on Earth. She has these powers that no one else has, and understands that there's a responsibility that when you have power, it behooves you to use that to help other people. And so America Chavez is this butt-kicking, tough woman hero. And in fact, so in the center of the piece here, what you can see is she's saying, "Fear not, mi gente." Fear not, my people. Which ties in again to that idea of peoplehood. She recognizes that whether you are from the same borough, because she was raised in Washington Heights in New York, here in our dimension. Whether you're from that borough or from another dimension, we're all one people in some way. She is one of a people. She is Echad Ha'am. if you'll forgive me, a reference to another piece you shared.
Exactly.
But I love the idea that, yes, I mean, she's on a journey. Zebulon is all about, you are at sea and how do you get to port? How do you find your way? And I think that's, remembering what your goals are, what your vision is. What is it that gets you up in the morning and makes you say, oh, this is what I need to do. This is what I do.
I wanted to share an anecdote with you, Isaac. I don't know if you recall, but about 3+ years ago, our director of education, Debbie Rowe, left Temple Bethel and moved back east. And when we asked her what would she like as a parting gift so that we could express our appreciation and love for her, she said, a piece of your work. So indeed, if you remember, we purchased a signed lithograph from you, and it was Star Wars as the background. And I believe the text was Lech Lecha as she was leaving and going across country. We got that framed, and that was her gift from her community of Temple Bethel. And so I just wanted to share that again with you, because it's so clear to me how valued your work is to people who have that knowledge and that appreciation. She's a Star Wars fan, and so it all came together for her. And indeed, you are a gift, and you enabled us to give a gift back to Debbie for all her good work.
Yeah, Debbie and Elon and me and my wife, I mean, we're part of the way that I know so many people is through Camp Newman. We are part of this larger camp community. So for those of you who know URJ Camp Newman, formerly was URJ Camp Swig and Camp Saratoga before that, it's this wonderful, kids go to summer camp and they learn about all this stuff. Well, we as clergy and educators and artists, we also build a community out there, and it's how we've made these wonderful connections. And it has been, even in this lockdown, we have found ways to connect with, we talk about faculty 1A. That's our usual crowd that we go with. We've been getting online with other rabbis and artists. And so Dan Nichols has been a part of those conversations sometimes, just making sure that we maintain that community, that we talk with each other. And that, I think, is what's behind this artist's Beit Midrash as well, right? It's about making sure that you keep those connections, that you keep talking, that you either, continue to build the community that you've been a part of, or you make new communities. You find ways to have these conversations and not just say, oh, well, I guess we're done. If we can't meet in person, we'll just assume that we're covered, we'll be good people, right? That's what it's about. But no, you need to get together and you pray and you study and you create and you discuss and you argue. So Debbie's a great friend. She is, I want to say, in North Carolina now.
Yes, correct.
And, it was a shame when she and Alan moved across the country, but they're good friends.
So,
Marla, I'll just share with you, Marla, that 2 summers ago at camp, Jody and I, celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary, and Isaac and Shauna were there. And one of the most cherished things that I have was that Rabbi Ali and the senior staff actually took the day off and prepared a surprise wedding for me and Jody. And including a beautiful 18th anniversary ketubah, upon which Isaac added some beautiful paper cuts, and it's just really, it's such a precious item for us as well. So,
and it was so great to be a part of that, Elon. And it's, as I said, I really genuinely believe in the concept of chidur mitzvah. Everything that we're commanded to do, we're commanded to make beautiful. That is, again, the chore. It's not enough, right, that you should light the candles every night of Hanukkah, but you've got to have a nice Chanukiah. Or it's not enough that you're going to eat outside in the hut, but you got to have fruit, and you got to have a nice little wall covering, and maybe bring in a rug. All of these things that we do become bigger and bolder and better, I think, because we're supposed to not just do the things that we are commanded or that we accept as commandments, but to do them in a way that brings us joy and beauty and celebrates our tradition. That, I think, is part of that responsibility of being a people, is you say, I'm not just you don't do it halfway. You go, if you'll forgive me, whole hog.
Amen, Sela.
Bonnie, let me pose one thing, and then Bonnie will bring you
Okay.
into conversation. Since this is the Artist Beit Midrash, and I want to bring it back a little to that, I think Hiddur Mitzvah, in fact, we studied Hiddur Mitzvah last year because of the importance of it. But can you just talk for a few minutes about your practice, like what type of paper, what you heard, and also in some of your texts, because we only saw a touch of them, you don't use any recognizable things that are comic book. You just use the colors from the comic book. And so that was part of, like today I saw a lot more of your use of actual people from the comic books and stuff, but that wasn't always true for you in some of your other works. So I wanted to just ask you to take a minute, and then we'll move to Bonnie, to really bring it back to this idea of Artist Beit Midrash and what informs you as an artist, and why you choose certain colors, and just your actual art practice.
Sure. And I brought you over here to the table here. We're in my studio. That's where we were broadcasting from. I brought you over here to my table because I'll open this piece up and show you a little bit about what goes on here. So I mentioned already why comic books. I should say I'm a big comic book nerd. I've been reading comic books all my life. So it's not like I discovered comic books through Judaism. I was certainly reading comics before I had any idea of, what being Jewish, really meant. But my interest in the stories and the storytelling there just dovetailed with the way that we tell stories. I mean, we're the people of the book. And I don't think that means you just collect the books. We read books, we write books, we tell stories. And so the idea of using one story as a way to explore another seemed so natural. And though it took me a little while to get here, I was cutting paper fairly traditionally for quite some time. As I said, I learned in Jerusalem when I bought my first knife, and I bought some colored papers and a cutting mat because I had nothing else to do. But it took me probably 10 years of cutting paper before I first started using comics. And as Georgia said, I was at times skittish about the comics revealing themselves too completely, about having Superman's head pop up in something. I would want to use the red from the cape or the blue from the tights or some of the background. I knew what was in it, but I thought that maybe people would not quite get what I was doing, and it would seem silly or childlike. And I was thinking about others. And that's not what you do, I think, as an artist. As an artist, you want to be authentic to what's in your head. And for me, it was using these comics and the stories and the characters, and they've really come out and become more prominent. And I am less hesitant at talking about process because of it. I am very, very much about talking about the comics and the stories and the reasons that I use it. So what I want to I'll show you here what I've got. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt you up like this. I would normally have my camera set up, but you're just going to have to suffer through me holding this on my shoulder. So I showed you this piece before. It's one of my larger golems. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up?
Yeah, we're just going to make you bigger so we can see what you're doing.
Oh, here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spotlight him.
I was going to say, if you spotlight me, Lon, that'll be great.
Oh,
awesome.
Perfect. Okay, great.
So you can see here, well, this is so funny. If you could see me, someone should be in here photographing me. It's perched on my shoulder like a parrot, if I were a pirate. So this is one of my larger golems that I just made. And so the golem for me has become a representation of, either what's troubling me or what's giving me strength. And this is a piece about grief and about loss. I'll talk a little bit about it before I get back into the process, just because I have to. So if you're fans of The Scarlet Witch and you've watched WandaVision, you'll know her story is very much about loss of her husband, loss of her community, loss of her children, which may or may not be real. But she's dealing with all of this and what it means to nonetheless carry on and to move forward. And for me, this golem is sort of this representation of all the things that we've lost in this past year, where we, and some of them are big things, right? We've lost family members to the pandemic, but we've also lost the ability to go to Jack in the Box and have those tiny little tacos, right? There are levels of grief and loss and all the things that we have given up. And so what you can see here is, yes, there are sections of the piece that are just color that come from those comics, but as well, there are sections, I'm going to try and avoid those shadows, where you can actually see like panels with speech bubbles where there are bigger sections of the comic. And that's because what I'm trying to do is recontextualize the stories in these comics to be about what I'm talking about. So you can see here in the center where the Scarlet Witch is saying, she's lost, I have neither. My family shattered, I've only created chaos. So this sense of, loss, and you can see her expression, she's sort of really down there, while in the hand, just above her to the left, you can see Captain Marvel being pushed back, and the voice saying, leave me alone. Now, she's actually a character that shows up in the Scarlet Witch TV show, in WandaVision, but this is Wanda's grief, and all she's doing with it, with her strength, is pushing people away. And so I really wanted to use those stories as a way for me to explore this idea of grief in the context of the Jewish story of the golem. Now, that said, you were curious about materials. So Georgia, I've done this before. I don't like to do it very often, but behind this layer of paper cut, I'm going to flip it over. This is what you're seeing come through the openings. So there's all of these collaged pieces of the comics that show through. And in fact, I sort of like the idea of this unformed shape here. I got to tilt again, of this unformed shape, but it only comes together really with this top layer, which is the first part of my process, is making that and then filling the behind with comics. So the paper on top is watercolor paper. It's heavy stock. It's like 220 pounds. It eats blades. So on a piece like this, which is 24 by 36, I could easily go through a dozen blades. What they do is they wind up, I've got a wine bottle full of them. I'm currently on my jar of pickled tomatoes. You can see that's where all the blades go when I'm done. It's just a standard X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade. The fun of doing these workshops with my wife, as I said, we've been doing them virtually, is we make these kits for people to make their own golems. And because we're not there, we're not bringing our suitcases full of materials, we make these golem kits to send out to everybody. It includes a knife, it includes some mat board, which you can use for 1 or 2 times cutting. It's not the most durable of materials. I use this flexible cutting mat here. They come in all kinds of sizes. But we give that, we have the watercolor paper. They use 90 pound, which is about 3 times or a third of the thickness of what I use in the studio. But I like the texture of it. I love the sound and the feel of the knife going through paper. If anyone has cut paper out there before, or for that matter, worked sculpturally or with a brush painting, there's something about that hands-on use of the tools. It's so different than playing around on my computer. I mean, I find it very different than drawing as well. Drawing is additive, right? You have an idea, you have to put it down on paper, and every time you add a line, you add to the piece. With paper cutting, I'm doing the opposite. I start with the finished block, and then I remove all the stuff that doesn't look like whatever I'm working on. But there's something about the knife in my hand and just really doing something so old and traditional in format that I get such pleasure out of. It's certainly a break from staring at a Zoom screen, from moving pixels around. We all have jobs now, right? We look at emails. It feels like every interaction we have now is a job because it's all typing, right? You talk to your kids now, you type. You have a video call. That's not the way personal interaction should be, and it's not how I think art traditionally has been made. For me, there's something about watercolor paper, a knife, and then I've got over here. I'll tilt you down here. So these are my long boxes. For those of you who don't know comic books, this is how you store comic books. Usually they're in bags with boards. Mine aren't because I'm just cutting them up, so I need to be able to access them. But what you're seeing here, this is my childhood comic book collection. New stuff that I've bought, older stuff that I remember buying when I was a kid, but also, I've got comics back here that are, old Superman stuff from the 40s and 50s. I have you know what I'm going to show you? This is one of my treasured possessions. So, which is why it's accessible, but it's not in a frame. So this is an old Thor comic that I picked up back in the day when you could go places in person and buy things. I was at a con and I was just buying some old comics, really cheap for workshops. So this is from 19 think I'd know this. I look at it often enough. 1968, Stan and Jack made this comic of Thor, and I picked it out of the bin. And when I got it home later, after buying it for $1, I found that it was a signed copy, signed by Jack Kirby.
Wow.
So this is, for me, this is that connection, right, to the community. People who make comics. I mean, this is, some Jewish guy who came up with a way to represent this pantheon of gods, working with a Jewish writer, telling stories that evoke, when you talk about Thor and Loki, the brothers, it's Jacob and Esau. It totally is. And so I feel like I'm in conversation with these other creatives, and then with these people who, the people who wrote down the stories in the Torah. That's, for me, the heart of it, is engaging and talking and conversing over millennia. I'm looking to see if any questions are in there, if anyone's, if I can show you anything else.
Bonnie was going to say something, but I have.
Oh, yeah, Bonnie.
Yeah, and actually you were talking about the golem, and that was what I was going to ask about. Did the golem come during the pandemic?
So,
and there's something about the golem. At the beginning of the pandemic, my book club was reading an Alice Hoffman book, which is a Holocaust story of survival of the world that we knew. And in that, a mother creates a golem to protect her daughter. And as I'm reading this, I'm going, here, I'm alone in my house. I want to create a golem to keep me company and to protect me. So I played in the dirt outside on my patio. And I had dirt and mud and, I don't know, old wine and whatever I had the recipe for making a golem. But I never thought about cutting one up. It was like I had this energy that was a golem that was for protection and healing. And that's what I'm wondering, is that the context that you're sharing your golem about, is to be protection and healing?
Yeah, so as I said, these are all my 12 by 12s. The latest one, I can tell you what number it is. It's number 53. I have 53 at this size. The first one was one that I showed in the slideshow. So that's the thing. Again, none of these are sealed yet. There's still I feel like they're not, until I'm done with the whole series, none of them are getting sealed up yet. But yes, I started this when the lockdown started last March, which is now 13 months ago.
Yeah.
When we went into lockdown, I was like, what do Jewish artists do when you are locked down? You think about protection and power, about being safe. And that's the golem story. The story of the golem, there's so many variations, right? It's this wonderful folk tale. It's a myth. There's the guy who said he found a story written by the son-in-law of this rabbi, and he had just made it up because he wanted to write science fiction. The golems are powerful and they are protectors, but they are also sometimes dangerous and they get out of control, which is why you always need to have an exit strategy. So if your golem is powered by the word truth across its forehead, you can scrub away the aleph to depower the golem. You're left with mem tav, met, death. So it's always a good idea, if you're going to build a golem, to know how you're going to unbuild the golem. But all of these have been, not just about strength, not just about power, but they have, let's see here, I'm going to find a few that are, like you mentioned loneliness. I actually was teasing my wife the other day that she took our youngest to go visit a college. Our youngest is headed off to college this fall. And it was their first night out of the house in 13 months. My first night alone in 13 months. And I said, I'm going to make a golem about fighting loneliness. I didn't, but all of them have been very personal. So this one is made out of comics featuring postal characters, particularly Willie Lumpkin from the Fantastic Four, back in the days when we were thinking that the post office was going to save us because of mail-in voting. This one is about freedom. So it's made with the Hulk, who's struggling with like these inner demons and becoming a monster. And he says, must get free. But there's this acknowledgement that no one is free until we are all free. Let's see, I do have one. Oh yeah, so here's a great one that was about the vaccine. Again, in development of the vaccine, you can read Here it says, find the antiviral, Bobby. And there's this whole conversation about, vaccines and is it tested? Will it work? That sort of uncertainty that we went through when they were first working on, vaccines. This was a post-election piece. So you can see, in fact, do I have my notes here? Yes, this is Marianne, the French symbol of liberty. She's sort of a stand-in with the red, white, and blue for some celebratory feelings that I was having. Let's see. There's the insurrection. So this piece features at its center an upside down American flag, which you may know is the American symbol for distress, when you fly a flag upside down. And there's this sense of just the burden and the fatigue. And in fact, down here you can read, we never expected this. It's this idea of what this golem, I don't know if it's protecting me or if it's just suffering from the same things that I was suffering from at the time. But let's see, roadside assistance required. I have a Me Too golem. There's another vaccine. This one, come on, this will be the last one because I know we're getting close to that 4 o'clock. If you can read in the golem's head, this golem is not empowered by truth, but by move. Come on, Georgia, it's time to move. And this is about voters' rights and working to fight voter suppression. It's made specifically with comics that feature characters in Georgia. And here you can see Wonder Woman encouraging people to vote. All of these things that give us strength, that make us feel like we can carry on to get to the next hurdle, right? It's one hurdle after another sometimes, but we find strength in our stories. We find strength in our shared commitment to values, in the covenant that we have all willingly accepted. When we say we are the people Israel, we are Am Yisrael, we have a responsibility, and that responsibility gets us from here to the next thing, day by day by day, until we find justice, until next year in Jerusalem, whatever it is that we want to think about getting through this crisis, we do it together. There's no way through, we read in our Mishkan Tefillah, no way through except by holding hands and marching together. And so that's where we are as a people.
And Isaac, this has been really amazing. So I'm going to ask you one last question, which is, do you first look for the colors and pull out the comic books that you might inspire you, or did the shapes come first and then you find what you would fill them with?
The shapes come first. So sketch, cut, and then I start looking at comics. And I may have an idea of what comics I want to use. So for instance, this is a piece about transgender rights. And I knew that I was going to look at some particular transgender superheroes like Koi Boy, who is featured here. And I knew that I was going to want to use some colors from the trans flag, but I did not look at the comics until I was done with the form of the golem, which actually has this sort of traditional weird helmet hair that you see in the old 1918 golem movie. But I always start with the form. I want that to be solid. I want the structure to be strong before I start trying to find comics that fit it. And that means that I don't always find the right sized piece, and I've got to collage things, or I may cover something up later. It may seem right at the beginning of the process, and then another layer goes on it. Sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 layers deep, and the pieces become a bit of an archaeological dig. If you were to dissect layer below layer, like these cities built on hills. But yeah, idea, structure for the paper cut, then the comics that go behind it.
I love Julie's question, by the way, because I always think the same thing when I'm looking at your work, Isaac.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel bad cutting up a comic book?
There's a reason this isn't in the long boxes. It's because I'm not going to cut this one up. I do feel bad. In fact, when I first had the idea, I photocopied some comics to use them instead, and it just it wasn't right. It didn't feel right. So I bought some cheapo comics from a comic shop to play with, ones that I didn't care about, and it was closer. But what I realized is I needed to have a connection to the stories and the comics and the source text, as it were, which is why it's my childhood collection that I'm cutting up, which is why they're real comics that I have read or that people have enjoyed. It's very important to me to use the comics, and it's hard. And I have made more than a few people gasp, when we get up to do a workshop and we're like, here's what you do, tear a page out, and people freak out. because they're like, but that's a Kirby. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. There's plenty of these. It's not worth much. But I've cut up some fairly expensive ones. But sometimes that's the comic I need. And when it's the piece that has to go in there, you don't just say, oh, I guess I'll use a different color. I don't feel like, you use what you have to. So.
Well, I think I want to really thank you. This has been for me, and I know your work, and we are very involved in exhibitions together. So, but I think it's been just a wonderful afternoon, and nice to have all these faces here from the temple. We will look forward to when we can have you in person. Because I know seeing your pieces up close, like you said, sometimes things are patched together. Sometimes there's this layering, and we don't quite get that full sense of it here. So it would be really wonderful. I think as an artist, process is like 9/10 of the thing. And so I'm glad we had time to bring it back to that. I just want to say to everybody that next month, Vicki Rikus-Fox is going to join us. She is an educator. She also co-wrote Shalom You All with Bill Aaron, who some of you met. She has been a longtime member of the Artist Beit Midrash in New York, and will bring lots of that to us. And she's just an incredibly creative person who her Judaism always comes through in what she does, even if it doesn't seem on the surface. In June is really going to be a focus on the members of the Artist Beit Midrash, although we hope other temple members will join us to really explore what our own members have been doing and to do some teaching with us. And the last thing I want to tell you is, remember we talked about the idea of us creating our own sukkah based on Sukkah City. Ellen Cantor and I have come up with a prototype, and we are in the process of sharing it with Lon and the rabbi. And our hope is that a lot of us will spend the summer really bringing our artistic talents together to create the first of redefining our sukkah at the temple, with everybody involved in the Artist Beit Midrash in this creative process to create Hiddur Mitzvah, to honor the high holidays and to honor us starting to come back together as a community in person. So Ilan, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Isaac, thank you so much. And it's amazing. I'm with Georgia, that no matter how long you know someone, how well you think you know their work, there's always something new that you can learn. And it was just great to experience more of your process and just see some of your incredible work that you've been working on this last year. So thank you for being with us. Thank you to everyone here at the Artist Beit Midrash. I will remind you that our May and June dates are both the first Sundays of the month. So May 2nd with Vicki Rikus-Fox, and June 6th focusing on our own artists from within our group here. And then we'll probably take a small hiatus and come back ready and raring to go for the sukkah in the fall. But this is just is the ship in the Zebulon piece a slave ship? Oh.
Oh boy.
It is a freedom ship for sure.
I liked Isaac's answer. Oof, no.
Imagine that in comic book lettering.
Exactly. I was like, oof. So anyway, but thank you all for being here. Thank you again, as usual, Georgia, for your leadership and for bringing all of these incredible artists to us. And remember, again, I'll say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again, art is only fantastic when there are those of us here to behold it. So please keep coming, tell your friends, have them come and experience all of our art together as well. Not that the creation of art isn't also fantastic, because that is, but every artist also needs to have their work seen and heard and experienced. So thank you all for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next month again. Remember, there's lots of programming at Temple Bethel all week long. Don't miss it. And with that, have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Isaac. Wonderful.
Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great program. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ellen.
You believe there. What a fascinating.
Yeah, definitely a fascinating program.
Yeah, it's pretty fabulous.
And I think one of the real things about it, what's really neat about our Artist Beit Midrash is we cover a lot of different arts. We have musicians, we have spoken word people, we have, traditional
Writers.
we have sculptors, and I think that brings to the richness of our Artist Beit Midrash at Temple Bethel.
We've also had chefs
Thank you,
involved,
Georgia.
and so it's great to have. I see Zarika with us, and Zarika's been spotlit in one of our art shows at the temple as a featured chef. So we really try to focus on really that art is all over. That it doesn't have to just be visual arts and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Well, Isaac, thanks again. This was great. And we absolutely will. I know I will see you next Sunday at the JI board meeting. But it's just really great that we can keep doing this even during this crazy time. But I really look forward to these gatherings. And so thank you for being our spotlighted artist.
It was a pleasure to join you, Georgia. Thank you again for inviting me, and to you and Ilan both for making it happen and bringing me out. It was great.
Awesome.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I wanted to tell you I loved his work. I don't know how to communicate in writing, so I was trying to type, but it didn't work. But I really loved his work.
We hear you perfectly, Zarika.
Thank you. I have a question for you, and it's up here if it ever gets to you. Is all of it, some of it look like you were painting and then adding the cutouts? Is that what, when we saw the whole painting, is it all covered with, is it all like a collage?
It is all a collage of comic books. At times there are pieces of maps or pieces of books that I plucked from the Geniza that were just going to be buried, and I salvaged some pages from them. In some of my work, I have done some watercolor or acrylics, which I then cut up and brought in for pieces of it.
Okay,
but
that's
predominantly comic books.
It's really beautiful. I just love
Thank you so much, Zarika. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Zarika. So wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
So I look forward to seeing everybody on May 2nd. I think you'll be in for another treat.
I think so. I was excited to see that Vicky was coming.
Yeah, so Vicky, she and I have been longtime art partners and museum partners. So
awesome.
We started out our careers at similar museums. So she will add a whole nother dimension to everything. I hope really, and I hope that Randy can really come to that one, because Vicky is trained as a museum educator.
Right.
I'm curatorial and she's education.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, Randy would have been here today, but we've had a crazy weekend, and she woke up with a migraine this morning on top of everything else. So she had to run Torah school still this morning, and with a migraine, and she was so apologetic. She really didn't want to miss it.
Say bye.
Bye, Bonnie.